welcome back to Foundations of Community. We are discussing the book When the Church Was a Family by Joseph H. Hellerman, and we are on chapter 2, Family in the New Testament World. We've previously discussed what a strong group society looks like, that the society surrounding the New Testament, that the society in which the New Testament was written, was a strong group society. And now we're going to look at more specifically what that strong group was based on, and that was based on family. So let's jump right in. All right. So he starts by discussing his daughter Rebecca, and his daughters, and how he expects their marriages to be the most meaningful, intimate, and satisfying relationships in their lives. That their relationship as siblings comes secondary to their relationship with their future significant other, and how that's just assumed as part of his life and part of our culture. But that was not the way it was in the New Testament world. We've got a excerpt here from the Sirach from 25:1. My soul takes pleasure in three things, and they are beautiful in the sight of the Lord and men. Agreement between siblings, that's number one. Friendship between neighbors, and a wife and husband who live in harmony. And notice that agreement between siblings comes first. How many people in today's culture here in America have their relationship between themselves and their siblings as drastically more important than any other relationship, including that with their spouse? I would say that would be the exception to the rule. You can have close brothers and sisters, but to have that trump your relationship with your spouse would be pretty unusual today. So let's look at what this family strong group looked like. We need to know to be able to really understand what was going on during the time, and therefore to be able to understand the terminology used in the New Testament in an appropriate way. So it was called a patriarchal family. And so you had a bloodline that branched from the patriarch, and this bloodline dictated your loyalties. And so you see an example here, a family tree with the patriarch and his wife. The bloodline does not include his wife, but does include their children. Okay? Male, female, doesn't matter. Their children are directly blood related to the patriarch. Now, whoever their children marry, not part of the bloodline. But the male bloodline continues, and that's where you see the sister down here. She gets married. Her husband's not part of the bloodline. She's part of the bloodline, but look, her children are not, because she is not male. The bloodline goes through the male line. So her brother's kids are part of the patriarchal, patrilineal bloodline. And then the grandson's grandchildren, but not the granddaughter's grandchildren. So as you can look at this, you start to see where alliances formed and where the most important relationships were. So your most important relationship was not necessarily between you and your husband. It likely wasn't. That was typically not your most important relationship. That was just a matter of life. That was just what you were assigned to. Your most important relationship was between you and your sibling, because you are connected by blood. You're in the same patrilineal bloodline, and you're in the same generation. So that is where your loyalty lies to the extreme. You took care of each other in a way that nobody else did. Therefore, to betray your brother or sister was considered the ultimate taboo. And if you look at the Old Testament, you see the stories that stuck out, that really were wild and crazy and really just caught their attention, were stories about brothers and sisters with loyalty and disloyalty. And that was just the thing. That was just where your most important relationship lay. I look at this and I feel bad for the sister here under the patriarch, because she's living in a household where her loyalty does not lie. And the author describes how that would look in a day-to-day basis, that she would leave her household and go spend time with her brother, because that's where her loyalty lied. That was her best friend. That was the one who would do anything for her, who would die for her. Her husband, not so much. And he would have his brothers and sisters come to him because that's just the way it was. That was your family. That was your strong group. So what does marriage mean in the strong group culture that is patrilineal? And we can kind of guess, because I think we see this in some variations in other parts of the world, but marriage at that time was a legal and social contract between two families, not two people, two families. For one, the promotion of the status of each family. Two, for the production of legitimate offspring for each family. And three, the appropriate preservation and transferal of property to the next generation for each family. And that comes from the book Families in the New Testament World by Osik and Balch. So let's look at what these ancient relational priorities meant. The closest family bond in the ancient Mediterranean society was not in marriage. It was the bond between siblings. Therefore, the most treacherous act that you could do as a human being was not to be disloyal to your spouse, but to betray your brother. That was considered the ultimate no. That was the ultimate character flaw. You were a horrible person if you betrayed your brother. And that is reflected throughout the Bible. So he gives us lots of examples, and I think these examples are beautiful illustrations to show us different variations on this singular point. You've got Herod and Miriam, and we know a lot about Herod, thanks to him being kind of, the rock star of the age, so to speak, even though he wasn't terribly liked. He was still watched. And so throughout these stories, we see what it looked like to be a part of this patrilineal strong group society. And for each of these examples, I would really like to know what you think. Have you seen this before? What would you think if you were in this position? Especially in the Mark Antony and Octavia position. What would you do if you were her and you were caught between these two enemies and you were just caught in the middle? Would you side with your spouse? Would you side with your brother? What if you were in a strong group family society? Would that change things? And then Aziz and Mustafa, the same thing. I mean, it's just crazy how different it is to put yourself in these positions. Let's see. The last one with Aziz and Mustafa, the part where frequently the brother-sister relationships have almost a romantic quality, and that the brothers remain their sister's primary source of companionship, advice, help, and defense, is reflective of how close they were as best friends and confidants, and they took care of it. Your life was in this other person's hand, and you trusted that. What would that look like today? How would society respond to that kind of relationship? Can you imagine? And so you look at the testament of Joseph. You see, my children, how many things I endured in order not to bring my brothers into disgrace. You therefore love one another in patient endurance. Conceal one another's shortcomings. God is delighted by harmony among brothers and by the intention of a kind heart that takes pleasure in goodness. And that's from Testament of Joseph. And then you look at Jacob and Esau. Look back at that story and look at it from this perspective now. And look at how treacherous that behavior was at the time. I mean, so here we've got, oh my goodness. Okay, I'll read it to you. Among yourselves, my sons, be loving of your brothers as a man loves himself, with each man seeking for his brother what is good for him. And each one will love his brother with compassion and righteousness, and no one will desire evil for his brother from now on and forever, all the days of your lives, that you will prosper in all your deeds and not be destroyed. And if either of you seeks evil against his brother, know that hereafter each one who seeks evil against his brother will fall into God's hands and be uprooted from the land of the living, and his seed will be destroyed from under heaven. And on the day of the turmoil and execration, and indignation and wrath, then with devouring burning fire, just as God burned Sodom, so too he will burn up his land and his city and everything which will be his, and he will not be written on high in the book of life. I am exhorting you, my sons, according to the judgment which will come upon the man who desires to harm his brother. And that is from Jubilees. I mean, that language is very clear about what they thought about people who betrayed their brother, and there was no ambiguity there. And so let's go to the New Testament. And in Mark, we see Jesus speak on this. And Jesus in Mark tells us, I tell you the truth, Jesus replied, No one who has left home, or brothers or sisters, or mother or father, or children or fields for me, and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age, homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children and fields, and with them persecutions, and in the age to come eternal life. So he's recognizing that people are leaving their strong group, which is beyond difficult. We can't imagine how difficult that was, because that was not just your economy, that was your identity, that was your livelihood, that was your best friend, that was your world. To turn your back on them and to have them persecute you and to lose that relationship, he's promising that he'll replace it much more in this new strong group of Christianity. So he's understanding how drastic and difficult it would be to leave behind your brothers and sisters in that world. And in Matthew, he talks about the future times that brother will betray brother to death, and how, dramatic that would have seemed at the time. And a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. And in a strong group family society, that is even more horrible to think about than it would have been then. It would have been very poignant. So we go back to the principles that we learned. And the first principle we learned in the last chapter is that in the New Testament world, the group took priority over the individual. And we now know what that group looked like. And we know that in the New Testament world, a person's most important group was his blood family. So we have a better understanding of what that group looked like. And then we get a final principle. In the New Testament world, the closest family bond was not the bond of marriage. It was the bond between siblings. And this all becomes relevant the more you read this book. And then we get some of these resulting values. These are kind of his hypothesis statements that he's proving throughout this book. Value 1 is the central value that characterized ancient family relations was the obligation to demonstrate undying loyalty towards one's blood brothers and sisters, And value 2 was that the most treacherous act of human disloyalty was not disloyalty to one's spouse, but the betrayal of one's brother. Okay, so these points are very clear so that you can see these points, these principles. This is what we're showing. This is what he's proving in this book. And I want you to really think on these things, because the rest of the book depends on your understanding of what this looked like. And so he kind of takes this Christian Origins quote from Bruce Molina, and it replaces the strong group language with church. Because in the New Testament, the church, the Christian church, in the sense of this new strong group, would have looked like this. And is this something that you would sign on for today, being from our culture? And so it shows how dramatically different things were, and how our understanding of what the New Testament world looks like needs to change. It needs to look more accurately like what it actually looked like then. And we tend to read the Bible through our own culture. We read the Bible and we see words like brother and sister, and we don't fully understand the magnitude of those words, because we are looking at them from our culture, and we need to be able to see them for what they were at the time. And so it's kind of a funny thing. He puts the word church in here with a strong group and says, would you join this church? The person perceives himself or herself to be a member of a church and responsible to the church for his or her actions, destiny, career, development, and life in general. The individual person is embedded in the church and is free to do what he or she feels right and necessary, only if in accordance with the church norms, and only if the action is in the church's best interest. The church has priority over the individual member. How many people would sign up for that church today in our culture? I'm going to say not too many. I presented this to a group of ladies discussing, this book, and this was shocking for a lot of them. They were just like, oh, that's horrible. That's not biblical. And I'm like, actually, you've got to look at it from their perspective, from the culture they were in, not the culture we are in. This looks horrible from our perspective, but from the perspective of a strong group culture, they were just transferring from one strong group to another. This wasn't as radical as it looks to us today. And we will talk about chapter 3 in the next video. See you there.